dive into this here topic about fats, oils, and cholesterol. Fascinating topic. This is really one of the first topics I started studying when I got interested in nutrition, geez, 20, 25 years ago. And it's a really important topic. I mean, I believe that the body is best run on fat as a main fuel supply. Our bodies are actually healthiest when they're burning fat for energy as opposed to a lot of carbs and sugar. So I'm a big fan of fat. But, you know, in the last 50 years in our country, we've gotten so much information that's been put out there that fat is bad for us. Stay away from fat. It hurts you. It causes heart disease. It causes all sorts of other problems in the body. It makes you fat. Don't eat fat. So this whole low-fat approach to eating has been promoted, and quote, complex carbohydrates like grains have been promoted, which tend to be glycemic. So we're eating a lot more carbohydrates as a culture, and glycemic carbohydrates as a culture. And as a result of that, what's the current epidemic in our culture? Diabetes. So we quit eating fat, and we got diabetes as a result of that, as a culture. So to me, this is a clear sign that this advice was off. And so this class, really the intention of this class for me was to help re-educate people on the topic of fat and cholesterol, to just demystify it and help people feel at ease around this particular macronutrient, so you're not afraid to eat it anymore. So let's kind of talk a little bit about some of the aspects of fat. Eating fat does not make you fat. That's the first thing to realize. Now, fat does have more calories per gram than carbohydrates and protein. 9 calories per gram, over twice as many calories per gram in fat as you get in carbohydrates and protein. So yes, if you eat a massive amount of fat, you're going to get a lot of calories, and you're probably going to gain weight. You know, anytime you eat excess calories, the tendency is to start to store some of those excess calories on your body as fat. That's what our bodies are designed to do. So I'm not advocating excessive consumption of fat. I'm advocating appropriate consumption of fat. The issue is that it's not so much about calories in equals whether you gain weight or not. It's not so much an issue of the calories, the quantity of the calories, as it is the quality of the calories. And certain types of calories affect our metabolism in ways that set us up to store fat. Specifically, high glycemic carbohydrates. High glycemic carbohydrates basically create a phenomenon known as insulin resistance. You spike your blood sugar frequently by eating high glycemic carbohydrates like wheat, like sugar, like potatoes, like, you know, all these gluten-free products with rice flour, tapioca flour, corn flour, potato flour, a glycemic nightmare, pretty much. So, you know, we get off gluten and we get diabetes instead, you know, so stay away from these gluten-free products made, highly processed products. They're a recipe for diabetes. So when you eat all these glycemic carbohydrates, you get insulin resistance. When you get insulin resistance, your body basically sets you up to store fat. You preferentially, when you consume food, your body preferentially stores that as fat, because the insulin's job is to get the sugar out of your blood and either burn it for energy or store it as fat. When you get insulin resistance, the first cells that get resistant to insulin are the muscle cells. So your body has trouble burning sugar in your blood for energy at that point. So it preferentially stores it as fat, oftentimes right around the middle. And so you start putting on weight, and your metabolism is set up to put on weight when you get insulin resistance. So carbohydrates set you up to gain weight, not fats. You know, when you eat fat, basically, fat time releases the carbohydrates in your diet into your bloodstream. So your blood sugar stays very stable when you consume fat. And fat also makes you feel full because it takes longer to digest than the other macronutrients. And fat, when it reaches your small intestine, triggers various hormones that basically tell your brain that you're full and promote this feeling of satiety. So all these things about fat work together basically to keep your blood sugar stable and to keep you feeling full, and you end up eating less. as a result of that. And you end up eating less frequently because you don't get these blood sugar crashes in the middle of the day like you do when you're eating a lot of carbs. And when you have a blood sugar crash, you have to eat to bring your blood sugar back up. But when you're eating a lot of fat, you don't get that. And therefore you don't have to be snacking constantly. And therefore you end up eating less calories even though you're eating this fat which has more calories than protein and carbs. So that's the first thing to understand, is that fat doesn't make you fat. In fact, done properly, adding more fat to your diet can actually help you lose weight because it will help to restore your metabolism, help to correct that insulin resistant situation, and then your body's able to start burning calories for energy again. You're actually going to start to lose weight. And it's really important to consume fat for a number of reasons. One thing to be aware of, though, we don't technically need to eat fat because our body has the ability to produce fat from sugar. So if we eat a bunch of sugar, our body can make fat. It can make saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and even some polyunsaturated fats from sugar. It can't make the essential fatty acids, though. You guys have probably heard the term essential fatty acids. There's specific types of fat called essential fatty acids that our body can't make. They're omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, they're called. You have to eat those because your body can't make them. But all other types of fatty acids, the saturated, the monounsaturated, your body can make. So you could get away without eating fat, just eating sugar and carbs, and your body can end up producing those fats, but that's not a good strategy to get all your fat needs met by eating a bunch of glycemic carbohydrates for some of the reasons we've just mentioned. One, you're going to get insulin resistance, you're going to put on a bunch of weight. Two, you're going to be seriously deficient in fat-soluble vitamins, right? Vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K. These are fat-soluble vitamins that are critical for the health of your immune system, for the health of your bones and teeth. And if you're not eating any fat, you're not going to absorb fat-soluble vitamins very effectively. To absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, they have to be consumed with fat. So if you aren't eating fat, you're not going to get any fat-soluble vitamins, you're going to get osteoporosis. Amongst many other problems. Your immune system's not going to be ideal because you're not getting vitamin D in there. You're going to have a lot of free radical damage, potential heart disease because you're not getting vitamin A and vitamin E in sufficient quantities absorbed into your bloodstream. It's important to consume fats for a number of reasons. And another reason why it's important to consume fat is for the health of the gallbladder. We have 600,000 gallbladder surgeries approximately every year in this country. So many people have had their gallbladder removed because medical authorities say, well, it doesn't really do much for you. And that's just drives me crazy. So to preserve the health of your gallbladder, you almost have to eat fat because when your fat in your diet reaches your small intestine, it triggers hormones which tell your gallbladder to squeeze. Your gallbladder is a reservoir for bile. Bile is produced in your liver. And part of what is in that bile are the toxins that are pulled out of your bloodstream. Your liver is constantly cleaning your blood and throws those toxins into the bile, which then get funneled into the gallbladder. The bile just sits there in the gallbladder waiting for the message from your small intestine, those hormones that get triggered when fat reaches your small intestine, and those hormones tell the gallbladder to squeeze and release the bile. So then you have a big amount of bile entering your small intestine, mixing with all your food at the exact right time to mix with all your food. And that bile helps emulsify your fat so that you can digest it properly. So when you get your gallbladder removed, it's really hard to digest fat because the bile doesn't reach the small intestine at the right time to mix with your food properly. And one of the best ways to get gallbladder problems is you try this low-fat diet approach. This is one of the reasons, there are other reasons, but this is one of the reasons we have 600,000 gallbladder surgeries in this country a year because people are into this low-fat thing. And if you're into this low-fat thing, fat is never getting to your small intestine. You don't have much fat in your diet. So that hormone that gets triggered when fat reaches your small intestine never gets triggered. So your gallbladder never gets the message to squeeze and release the bile. So all that bile just sits there in your gallbladder with all the toxins that your liver's cleaned out of your bloodstream, by the way. And the bile fluid slowly gets sluggish and stagnant, and they start to coalesce into gallstones after a time, and then before you know it, the doctor's recommending you get your gallbladder removed. So it's important to eat fat to maintain a healthy liver gallbladder system. Also essential fatty acids, important to consume so you have a healthy inflammation response. You need to be able to create inflammation. Your body needs to be able to create inflammation. And to do that, it has to have essential fatty acids, specifically the omega-6 essential fatty acid, are required to be able to produce inflammation. Your immune system uses inflammation to basically do its job. So if you cannot produce inflammation because you're not eating the omega-6 essential fatty acid, you don't have a very functional immune system. You also need the ability to reduce inflammation, which the omega-3 essential fatty acids provide for you. And you need a balance between the omega-3 and the omega-6s so that you have a balance between that ability to inflame and ability to reduce inflammation so that you can stay healthy on a regular basis. So you have to eat these essential fatty acids in a good balance to be healthy. Without fat in the diet, it's difficult to properly digest and absorb proteins. Fat is actually part of what assists your body in digestion, proper digestion. Also, all your cells have a cellular membrane, and the cell wall of that cellular membrane is composed primarily of fatty acids. And these fatty acids, many different types of fatty acids make up your cellular membrane, so you need to eat many different types of fats, so your cellular membranes have all the different types of fats that they need to be healthy and functional. Otherwise, your cells, if your cellular membrane's not healthy, your cells aren't going to be healthy. Your cells are the building block of all the organs and tissues in your body. If your cells aren't healthy, you're not going to be healthy. And finally, fat makes food taste good. So you really give up a lot when you give up fat. You give up your health and you give up the taste of your food. So let's talk about some of these different types of fats. I want to help you guys have an understanding of the different types of fats that are out there, so that because different types of fats have different properties that are important to be aware of in order to optimize how you work with those fats, and how you cook with those fats, and how you store those fats, so that you keep those fats optimally healthy to nourish your body optimally. So the first kind of fat is the fat we've all learned to be fearful of, saturated fat. Just so you're aware of just a basic understanding of the chemistry, the biochemistry of fats, it's good to know that all fats are basically, when they're in the tissues, they're in the form of, quote, triglycerides. And this is also true of foods. Triglycerides are basically a molecule that has a glycerol base and then 3 fatty acids attached to that glycerol molecule. When you consume a food that's full of these triglycerides, the enzyme systems in your body basically cleave the fatty acids off of the glycerol molecule. The glycerol molecule your body can basically convert into sugar and burn that for energy. And then the fatty acids can go towards either energy production in your body or forming tissues, incorporating the cellular membranes, whatever your body needs them for. So I've got a picture of a fatty acid here, and this happens to be the picture of a saturated fat. And you see basically a fatty acid, this is what this is a picture of, is an acid molecule, which is these, the last carbon on the left-hand side of this molecule with a double-bonded oxygen to it, and then a single-bonded oxygen and hydrogen attached to that carbon as well. That's the acid end of the fatty acid molecule. It's called palmitic acid. And then attached to that acid is a long carbon chain. This basically string of carbons, which the C represents. And each of these carbons has 4 bonds, and each of these carbons has 2 hydrogens attached to it. And you'll notice there are no double bonds in this string of carbon chains. It's only single bonds. One line between each of the carbons that designates a single bond. So that's the definition of a saturated fat. A saturated fat is a fat that in the carbon chain, in the fatty part of the fatty acid, there are only single bonds. And as a result of the fact that there are only single bonds in those carbon chains, the saturated fats are very linear. They're very straight in terms of their structure. They're not bent at all. Very straight structure. And as a result of the fact that they're very straight, they can stack on top of each other very easily and effectively. Which basically means that saturated fats can become fairly dense because they stack together very quickly, very easily, and it means they have a fairly high melting point, which is why coconut oil, which is primarily saturated fat, which is why palm oil that's primarily saturated fat, which is why butter that's primarily saturated fat are solid at room temperature. Because they are saturated, because those molecules are stuck together, packed together very densely, and therefore they maintain the solid aspect at room temperature. They have a high melting point. And because of the fact that they don't have any double bonds in this carbon chain, they're very stable. When there are double bonds in this carbon chain, these double bonds are very reactive with things like light, oxygen, and heat. So because the saturated fats don't have any double bonds, they're not chemically reactive. They're very stable, which means saturated fats are not typically degraded by light, heat, and oxygen like a lot of the other fats are. So that's why saturated fat, coconut oil, can sit in your cupboard in your kitchen for years and it doesn't go bad. Doesn't have to be refrigerated. Very stable fat. You can fry with coconut oil and it won't be degraded. Even though when you fry, you expose an oil to light, heat, and oxygen simultaneously. The three things that will degrade an oil, you expose them to that oil simultaneously when you fry with that oil. Frying is extremely damaging to oils as a result of that, unless the oil is primarily saturated, which coconut oil and palm oil and butter are. So the only oils I would ever fry with, if you're going to fry, are coconut oil, palm oil, and butter, because they're primarily saturated fat, and therefore they're not going to be turned into toxic compounds when you fry with those oils. So we'll go on to the next page here. And so I just wanted to run through some of the things that saturated fats do in your body to just help sort of reprogram your brain a little bit. After 50 years, most of us haven't been around for 50 years, and it's even been longer than 50 years. This is like 1950s this started, so it's almost been 60 years now that people have been getting this programming, stay away from fat, and especially saturated fat. So let's reprogram a little bit. Let's look at saturated fats and some of the things that saturated fats do for you in your body. First of all, they compromise at least 50% of your cellular membranes, and they're what give your cellular membranes appropriate stiffness and rigidity. So saturated fat basically helps prevent our bodies from being like Jell-O. You know, if your cellular membranes don't have any saturated fat, they're very fluid, and they allow things to get inside the cells that shouldn't be in there. And the cellular metabolism gets all clogged up. So we need saturated fat in our diet, in our bodies, in our cellular membranes, basically to keep our cells healthy, to keep the appropriate level of stiffness and rigidity in our cellular membrane. They play a vital role in the health of our bones. For calcium to be effectively incorporated into the skeletal structure, at least 50% of the dietary fats should be saturated. And that's kind of a critical thing to be aware of. You need to have at least a portion of the fat you consume saturated fat. And they're important for proper utilization of the essential fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are better retained in the tissues when the diet is rich in saturated fats. Short and medium chain saturated fats have antimicrobial properties, and they can help keep unfriendly microbes in the gut down. So the type of oils that are rich in short and medium chain fatty acids are butter and coconut oil. So just be aware of that. Those two fats are particularly good at providing these short and medium chain fatty acids that basically destroy unfriendly microbes. Very antimicrobial. Saturated fats are the base material out of which the body makes cholesterol. Cholesterol, by the way, one of the most critical compounds in your body. We'll talk a little more about cholesterol later. Cholesterol is the precursor to critical hormones like vitamin D, stress hormones like cortisol, which are secreted by your adrenal glands so that you can have a healthy stress response, and healthy reduction of inflammation response when needs be. Cortisol is anti-inflammatory. Sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone are produced from cholesterol as well. So, you know, eating a very low-fat diet is not great for the sex drive. It's not great for the anabolic metabolism in the body, which is really driven by these sex hormones. Anabolic metabolism is the building up of tissue in the body as opposed to the catabolic or tearing down of tissue. And one of the ways you can determine what level of health you're at is to get some testing done to see where your metabolism is at, whether it's dominated by anabolic processes or catabolic processes. One of the quickest ways to really send your hormones into or body metabolism into a catabolic state is eat a low-fat diet, specifically low-saturated fat diet. Also, the stearic acid and palmitic acid, two saturated fats, are the preferred foods for the heart. That's what the heart likes to burn for energy. So you need that. It's interesting how saturated fats have been associated with heart disease. And the reason that is because saturated fats are sticky, right? Saturated fats, because they're linear, because they stick together easily, are very sticky, and they can start to coagulate the blood and make the blood thick. And if you get too much saturated fat in your diet, your blood can become too thick, which can make clotting a possibility. We've already, you know, got people with the blood too thick as it is who have clotting potential. So here's the thing with saturated fat and blood thickness and clotting potential and potential heart disease with saturated fat. Saturated fat is really not the issue, because when you increase the amount of fat in your diet, typically it doesn't affect your blood fat, the lipids in your blood, the triglycerides in your blood. Dietary fat usually does not have a big effect on blood triglycerides, because if you consume more fat, the body's going to break down less fat and bring it into the bloodstream. So it'll keep the bloodstream triglycerides relatively constant. You may get a little bit of rise if you increase a lot more fat, but it's not going to excessively raise up your triglycerides in your blood and make your blood more sticky. What will do that is sugar, because when you eat excess sugar, your body gets it, your metabolism gets into this insulin-resistant mode where it's got to turn that sugar into fat and store it. Remember, you're in a store fat metabolism when you're insulin resistant. So when you eat a bunch of sugar, that's going to raise your blood lipids, your blood triglycerides big time. So when you get high triglycerides, sugar is the main culprit. It's not the fat, it's the sugar. So if you want to eat saturated fat, yeah, if you've already got a lot of saturated fat in your blood because you're eating a bunch of sugar, it's probably wise to not eat a lot of saturated fat to keep your blood from getting any more sticky. But if you want to eat saturated fat, you can eat as much saturated fat as you want, as long as you quit eating sugar. I mean, when you cut out the glycemic carbs in your diet, then you can start eating saturated fat and enjoying it. And so, you know, saturated fat is something that is very enjoyable to consume. It makes food taste good. So the key is to just cut down on the sugar intake, and then you need to eat saturated fat because you need saturated fat for all the things that we've just mentioned here. And also dietary sources of saturated fat, specifically the animal saturated fat sources, are very rich in vitamins A, vitamin D, and vitamin K2. And specifically vitamin K2, vitamin A are not found in a vegetarian diet. So these are critical vitamins to absorb. You can get vitamin A from beta carotene potentially in plants if you can convert it to vitamin A. Significant amount of the population can't do that conversion very well. But vitamin K2, you've got to get it by eating animal foods, ideally. And to absorb that vitamin properly, you have to eat that with fat. And specifically, the saturated fats in nature are where the vitamin K2 is typically found in foods, in animal meats, basically. And finally, saturated fats help protect the liver from alcohol and other toxins. So saturated fats are critical to consume, and you can consume an abundance of saturated fat as long as you stop consuming sugar. And it's not going to impact your heart health. It may even help your heart health, right? The saturated fat literally will feed your heart muscle when it's not in excess. So let's talk about another type of fat, monounsaturated fat. So monounsaturated fats, you know, the structure of monounsaturated fats is very similar to this linear saturated fat molecule, except that monounsaturated fats, one of these bonds between the carbon atoms is a double bond. And remember, double bonds are highly reactive. And so monounsaturated fats, mono meaning one, for one double bonded carbon. Monounsaturated fats have one of those double bonds, so they tend to be more fragile. They tend to be more easily degraded by light, heat, and oxygen, the three things that degrade fats, than saturated fats. So you got to be a little more careful with your monounsaturated fats. The main monounsaturated fat that you're going to be exposed to in your diet is olive oil. Olive oil is, people call it the omega-9 fatty acid. And that's where most of the monounsaturated fat comes from in your diet. So monounsaturated fats, when you have a double bond in this carbon chain, it bends the molecule a little bit. So it's no longer linear. So that means the monounsaturated fats are not going to stick together so easily. They're not going to stack on top of each other so easily, which means the monounsaturated fats are not as sticky. They tend to have a lower melting point, basically. So that's why olive oil is liquid at room temperature. But when you put it in the refrigerator, it turns into a solid. Because you're getting to that, you know, freezing / melting point in the olive oil. And I wouldn't recommend frying with olive oil because it is a monounsaturated fat. It's got that double bond, which makes it very reactive to light, heat, and oxygen, which means it's going to create some rancidity when you expose it to light, heat, and oxygen. So I think olive oil is best left drizzled on top of your food, not really used to fry your food. And the final type of fat here that I've listed is polyunsaturated fat. Polyunsaturated fats have 2 or more double bonds in the carbon chain. So polyunsaturated fats would look just like this fatty acid, except there'd be 2 or more of these bonds between the carbon atoms that have double bonds. So you get more double bonds. Some polyunsaturated fats have as many as 6 double bonds in the carbon chain, in the fatty part of the fatty acid molecule. And remember, each place you have a double bond kinks the molecule. So polyunsaturated fats are very bent, which means they don't stack on top of each other very well, which means they have a very low melting point. So an example of a polyunsaturated fat is flax oil. Flax oil is oil pressed from flax seeds. It's very rich in these omega-3 essential fatty acids. And flax oil is liquid at room temperature. It's liquid in the refrigerator, and it's even liquid in the freezer. You freeze flax oil, it's going to remain liquid. Because the freezing point or the melting point of flax oil is something like -11 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's because it's such a kinked molecule, and it doesn't stick together well, and it's hard to get it to coalesce into a solid. And as a result of that, these polyunsaturated fats, examples of polyunsaturated fats of seeds, which are high in polyunsaturated fats, are walnuts, hemp seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, macadamia nuts. So these are all seed examples which are high in the polyunsaturated fats. The oils in these seeds are very fragile. They will go rancid very easily. You definitely should not fry with these oils. You should avoid cooking with these oils. These should be drizzled, oils that are drizzled on your food, basically, and consumed that way for optimum health. And the essential fatty acids, which I'm calling EFAs, are polyunsaturated fats. So the omega-6 and the omega-3 fatty acids are essential fatty acids, basically.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Where does avocado oil fall in?
Avocado oil is mostly monounsaturated. Yeah, so it's more like olive oil in terms of it's more stable than flax oil. You don't necessarily have to, you know, put it in the refrigerator like you do with flax oil, but it's still something that you definitely wouldn't want to be frying with. Let's talk about essential fatty acids here, and specifically Roman numeral number 4 here, EPA and DHA. So we've discussed the omega-6 and the omega-3 essential fatty acids, which are found in things like flax seeds and chia seeds. Now when you eat flax seeds or chia seeds or walnuts or hemp seeds or macadamia nuts that are rich in the omega-3 and the omega-6 fatty acids, your body converts the omega-3 fatty acids in those seeds to the critical compounds EPA and DHA. EPA and DHA are very important for your body's metabolism. EPA and DHA are found in abundance in fish oil. This is why fish oil consumption is such a big thing in our culture. Fish oil consumption is part of the antidote to a high sugar diet. Because a high sugar diet, what's your body make that sugar into? Saturated fat. Your cellular membranes get way too rigid because they have way too much saturated fat because you're eating way too much sugar. And then your cells are not sensitive to insulin anymore. So you get insulin resistant. And then you start to get all these problems which flow from insulin resistance like obesity and heart disease, etc., etc. So essential fatty acids, because they're polyunsaturated fatty acids, because they provide fluidity to your cellular membranes, basically help your cells become more sensitive to insulin over time and reduce that insulin resistance, and therefore reduce all the diseases that flow from insulin resistance, which is why modern humans, everybody's on fish oil these days, because we're all consuming way too much sugar. Fish oils are crucial for this. EPA is a compound that is produced from the omega-3 essential fatty acid, and EPA is critical for your body's ability to keep inflammation down. It's a highly anti-inflammatory fatty acid. So if you don't have EPA in your body, you're going to have a lot of chronic inflammation going on. What happens when you have chronic inflammation? You get heart disease, because that chronic inflammation is happening in your arteries. And your membrane in your arteries is very fragile, and it gets damaged very easily from chemicals, from free radicals. Anything that's in your blood that shouldn't be will damage that membrane in your mucous membrane in your arteries. So, and then when you get damage in your artery walls, your body tries to repair it, and typically material starts building up in there, which is arterial plaque, leading to heart disease. So EPA helps prevent that because it helps keep inflammation down, helps keep your artery walls healthy as a result of that, and it just helps keep chronic inflammation down throughout your body. I mean, inflammation is like the root of degenerative disease. DHA is another omega-3 family fatty acid that the plant-based omega-3s are converted into. And DHA is the primary fat in your brain. Your brain's like 60% fat. Your brain is mostly fat. This is why it's critical for pregnant women and nursing mothers to be consuming healthy fats, specifically these omega-3 fatty acids, because the omega-3 fatty acids have 2 double bonds and potentially up to 6 double bonds. Right? Remember I said those double bonds are highly reactive. So you would imagine, remember all these fatty acids get incorporated into your cellular membranes. What's the part of your body that has the most active cells? Your brain. So your brain is where all these omega-3 fatty acids like to go, because your brain cells are so active and they like these lots of double bonds in the fatty acids so they can have these reactive molecules present so the brain can do all the work it needs to do. And DHA is approximately 25% of your brain fats is DHA. So this is really a critical fat to have, and women produce more DHA than men do. When you consume like chia seeds or flax seeds, your body makes that into DHA. Women are typically better at doing that than men. I think there's an evolutionary reason for that. Women need to be better because they need to produce babies and they need to feed the baby with DHA whenever the baby's growing, because remember 25% of your brain fats is DHA. It's the critical brain fat to have healthy brain growth. And it's also critical for the health of your retinas and your eyes. It's incorporated into all the parts of your body that are very reactive with the outside world. Your brain and your eyes, this is where the omega-3 fats are located. So important to consume your omega-3 fats and consume your EPA and DHA. Here's something that's kind of critical to be aware of. If your body's healthy, it can produce EPA and DHA from the plant-based fats, from the flax oil, from the chia seeds, from the walnuts, from the macadamia nuts, from the hemp seeds. Most people are not healthy enough to do that conversion. I'm not even healthy enough to do that conversion. I just got a blood test done, and I am producing EPA pretty effectively, but I'm a little deficient in DHA production. There's all sorts of enzymes that your body needs to do these conversions from like omega-3 flax oil to EPA and DHA, and those enzymes require all sorts of B vitamins and minerals, and if you're deficient in just one of those things, you're not going to convert very well. So you have to be like at the pinnacle of health to eat plant-based omega-3s and convert them to EPA and DHA. And so that's why, although EPA and DHA are not called essential fatty acids, for 99% of the population, they are essential fatty acids. Your body's not able to produce these in effective quantities itself, and therefore you have to eat things that have EPA and DHA in them. You're not going to get EPA and DHA from a vegetarian diet. You got to get EPA and DHA from fish, cold water fish like halibut and mackerel and salmon and sardines and anchovies and mussels. These are cold water fish that have an abundance of the EPA and DHA already in them. So even though your body's probably not producing effective amounts or enough EPA and DHA, you can get around that by consuming fish and get your EPA and DHA needs met, or consume a fish oil. Or if you really want to do the vegan thing and you're deficient in EPA and DHA, there's algae oils out there. There's algae growing in the ocean that produce EPA and DHA. That's where the fish get, by eating those algae. So you can bypass the fish if you still want to be vegan and get your EPA and DHA needs met that way. Let's go on to the next topic, factors which damage and destroy fatty acids. We've already touched upon this. I'll just go through it briefly. But 3 things damage fats. This is really the most important reason to be taking this class. Fats are such a critical nutrient, and it's so important that you learn how to keep your fats healthy and make sure the fats you consume are in a healthy state, because fats will degrade readily from contact with light, heat, and oxygen. So you need to be aware of this. Specifically, saturated fats, right, we talked about, are very stable. Things like palm oil, things like coconut oil, things like butter, and therefore light, heat, and oxygen don't affect them as much. That's why in a grocery store you see a lot of the coconut oils in a clear container. It doesn't matter, they don't need to be protected from light so much because they're not damaged very quickly by light heat. They will be damaged, you know, a couple of years. You let coconut oil sit there, it'll go rancid. But it takes years for that to happen. You let flax oil sit there on the grocery store shelf, unrefrigerated in a clear container, we're talking days until that oil's rancid. You know, it's definitely important to be aware of. That's why olive oil is typically not refrigerated, because it doesn't really have to be, as long as it's stored in an opaque glass container, dark glass container, because that dark glass protects it from light. And so, you know, the room temperature is not a very hot temperature, and so the olive oil does okay. It'll last for a reasonable, you know, 6 months to a year in a green glass container on a grocery store shelf, unrefrigerated. But flax oil, you better buy that flax oil in the refrigerator, in a dark container that doesn't allow light to get through, and ideally in a container that's been nitrogen flushed. And ideally the flax oil should have been pressed in a cold press situation, or expeller press is another example of a pressing technique that would satisfy this, that doesn't generate any heat. And ideally the flax oil was pressed in a cold pressed system in the presence of a nitrogen atmosphere. So that where they're pressing it, actually they've removed all the oxygen, and it's just nitrogen. So there's no, when you're pressing the oil, it doesn't ever come in contact with oxygen, doesn't come in contact with heat because you're mechanically pressing it, or cold pressing it, and the area is dark where it's being pressed. So it never comes in contact with any of these things. It's immediately put into a dark container and nitrogen flushed, and then put in the refrigerator in the health resource section. Then when you buy it and open it, you take it home, put it in the freezer. Keep it as cold as possible, And buy your flax oil in small bottles. Don't buy the big giant, you know, bonus pack kind of thing. Buy it in small bottles, because as soon as you open that flax oil, it starts to go bad. And so you want to go through that flax oil within a couple weeks, no more than a month, and store it in the freezer in between the times that you use it. So, do you have a question?
Well, I just wondering, like, I just always get flax seeds and then like grind them up and use them in things like smoothies, but
Totally.
you're not getting enough by you doing that, or?
Good question. You're getting plenty of omega-3 fats when you're doing that. You're not getting as much as when you consume the flax oil, right? Because the oil is pure fat. The flax has protein and fiber and all sorts of other things besides the fat. So they're getting more omega-3 fats in a tablespoon of flax oil than you are in a tablespoon of flax seeds. And when you grind your flax seeds, grind them at home in a coffee grinder. You grind just as much as you need. And if you do grind more than you need, store them in the freezer. And you know, you want to produce massive quantities of ground up flax. I would never personally purchase ground up flax seeds that have already been ground up for you, because they're typically packaged in those foil pouches, which are, the oxygen gets through there, and they're going to be sitting on the shelf production facility for months before they ship, and then the grocery store shelf for more months until you purchase them. By the time you buy them, there's already significant levels of degradation of those super fragile oils in there. That's the last thing you want to do to your poor liver, is eat a bunch of rancid fat. It's really hard on your liver. Our livers are already stressed enough as it is in the modern world. We don't want to be stressing them out any more than we have to.
Doug,
Yeah.
I generally recommend to grind them right before you use them.
Yeah, totally. That's definitely the way to go. I think I've seen some data on ground up flax seeds. Somebody at one point did a test to measure rancidity levels, and it was surprisingly good in terms of their ability to maintain, because flax seeds do have some antioxidants that helps protect those fragile oils once you grind up the seed. But still, I don't, you know, the test was like 2 days later, and so I don't really feel like it's worth pushing that envelope. You know, just grind what you need in general. Heat, you know, oxygen, if you expose the oil to light, it's one thing. But then if you expose it to oxygen at the same time, you're going to speed up the degradation of the essential fatty acids by light like 1,000 times. So light and oxygen together exposed is a double whammy of epic proportions. And then heat generates trans fatty acids. Another process that generates trans fatty acids is when you hydrogenate an oil. Hydrogenation is, it's just, it would be comical if it wasn't so sad, if it wasn't so tragic, that we were sold on the idea that margarine is healthy and butter is bad. Butter, this rich fat full of antimicrobial short-chain fatty acids, full of all sorts of things which nourish our body, fat-soluble vitamins, that's bad for us. But margarine that has been hydrogenated and producing all sorts of trans fatty acids, that's good for us? I mean, like, really? I mean, what kind of insanity is that? I mean, I want to fire that person that came up with that advice. So you stay away from margarine, for heaven's sakes, and stay away from all hydrogenated and partially hydrogenated oils. These are extremely toxic because they have trans fatty acids, not to mention many other things in them. And trans fatty acids are very damaging to your body's tissues. These are fats that basically, it's a polyunsaturated fat that's turned into something that's more like a saturated fat. So that makes it more stable. So you can take your polyunsaturated fat, which would have gone bad in a week, and turn it into something that will keep for a very long time, which is why this process was invented in the first place, to increase the profits of the food manufacturers, right? So things could sit on the shelf for a long period of time, and they wouldn't have things going bad often. But what the problem with that is, the particular structure of the trans fatty acids, our body's enzymes don't work with that structure. Our body doesn't know what to do with these trans fatty acids. It has trouble getting them out. And so they end up depositing in various places in the body, and where they deposit, they're not reactive with the body metabolism, and so they clog up the works. They deposit in our cellular membranes and prevent our cells from absorbing nutrients and secreting toxins. And so slowly but surely, your tissue turns into plastic. which is what trans fatty acid is. And you eat trans fatty acids, you slowly turn into plastic. And the human body's not meant to be plastic. So stay away from trans fatty acids. Don't heat your polyunsaturated fats above 300 degrees. That's the temperature at which trans fatty acid formation begins. So just be aware of that. You know, it's okay with flax oil if you want to cook up some quinoa, and then before you eat the quinoa, drizzle some flax oil into that, and then some other spices. Make yourself a nice quinoa salad, then go ahead and eat that. That's fine, because your quinoa, you know, may be 150 degrees or 200 degrees when you take it off the stove and first pour your flax oil in. That's not going to produce trans fatty acids. Yeah, I mean, it's going to expose it to some heat and some light and some oxygen, but you're eating this quickly, so that's okay, that's acceptable. But certainly, you don't want to be baking with flax oil or even flax seeds. Not ideal. You know, and it's funny how nutritional advice goes. You know, the omega-3 fats were propagated as this great benefit through the media. Everyone needs to be consuming their omega-3 fats, so food manufacturers started putting flax seeds in everything. Flax seeds in cereal, flax seeds in muffins, flax seeds in all these things that have been heated to really high temperatures. They'll grind up the flax seeds into a powder, exposing the fragile oils to light, heat, and oxygen, and then bake them at really high temperatures, and then put them in a packaging system where oxygen's just readily getting through that package, and set them on a grocery store shelf for like a year. And then you look at this, and if you're not educated, you're like, wow, these muffins have omega-3 fats? This is going to help me. I think I'll buy this. This is going to hurt you, you know, because you're eating all these highly damaged fats that are going to be enormous stress on your liver. So, you know, this is why you're taking this class, you know, to learn these things and to learn how to be an educated consumer. So let's talk about we've already talked about cooking with oils. I'll just let you kind of read up on that. Let's talk about refined versus unrefined oils. So first of all, unrefined oils. Unrefined oils are the best. And unrefined oils are oils that basically, ideally, are extracted from the seed with a mechanical press, where steps have been taken to keep the heat production down, and manufacturers will call that cold pressed. And so, ideally, your oil should be mechanically expeller cold pressed. Something along those lines. And then that should be it. They shouldn't be putting it through any more processes. And they should be stored properly. So ideally, your oil should be stored in an opaque container, and the really fragile omega-3 rich oils like flax oil and hemp oil should be stored in the refrigerator. The other oils, you could probably get away with storing them in a grocery store shelf out of the refrigerator if they're primarily monounsaturated fat, like olive oil or avocado oil. They should be in an opaque container, though, green glass of some sort. I definitely don't recommend the consumption of seed oils, because most seeds are very rich in omega-3, omega-6s rather. I'm talking walnut oil, I'm talking sunflower oil, I'm talking almond oil, canola oil, you know, many of the pumpkin oil. I don't recommend the consumption of these oils when they're sitting on a grocery store shelf in a clear container, because they're very rich in the omega-6 polyunsaturated fat. And they're sitting there in a clear container, typically plastic, and plastic oil readily promotes leaching of chemicals in plastic into the oil structure. So you have estrogen oil now when your oil is packaged in plastic. And as it's sitting there in a clear container, those polyunsaturated omega-6 fatty acids are going rancid very readily. So if an oil is not packaged in some sort of opaque container, I pretty much don't buy it unless it's coconut oil or palm oil, because they don't really need to be in an opaque container. The other oils, I have to see them in an opaque container, or I'm not going to go there. And if it's anything other than avocado or grapeseed, which is another monounsaturated rich fat. Grapeseed's actually rich in omega-6 too, so it should be refrigerated. But if it's anything other than olive oil and avocado oil, I want to see it in the refrigerator as well. because otherwise it's just too sensitive, it's too fragile, too many omega-6 fatty acids in those oils. Now, you really are picky and you really love your almond oil, you really love your pumpkin oil, you really love your walnut oil, you really love your sesame oil, you can find online distributors who are aware of this issue and package these oils in dark glass containers and will ship them to you in a nitrogen flush situation, and so you can get those oils in a healthy way. But sesame oil is the one exception to this omega-6 rich oil issue that I think is an okay oil. And actually, there's a sheet here in your handout that talks about the healthy fats versus the unhealthy fats. So this sheet right here, you can go through this to sort of get a list of the oils and fats which I consider to be healthy, and then the oils and fats which I consider to be toxic. Now, if your diet is primarily toxic fats, yeah, low-fat diet would be a good thing for you, right? Because toxic fats are one of the easiest ways to damage your body. But I implore you to make your diet abundant in the healthy fats. And I list sesame oil as one of the healthy oils. And sesame oil, quality sesame oil should be in a green glass. And you go to the co-op, or Olympia Co-op, you can get sesame oil in green glass. Because sesame oil is rich in omega-6. Sesame oil should be, like other omega-6 oils, also refrigerated. But you can get away without refrigerating sesame oil because sesame is very rich in antioxidants. So when you press the sesame seeds into oil, those antioxidants get into the oil as long as the sesame oil hasn't been refined and have the antioxidants removed in the refining process, and it will keep relatively well. So sesame oil is one of the exceptions to those omega-6 rich oils that you can purchase in an unrefrigerated situation, and it'll be fine. So refined oils, I just stay away from them. I don't like oils that say refined are, quote, safe for cooking. Oils have a, quote, smoke point, basically, where as you're heating them up to a certain temperature, they start to smoke. That smoking is being produced by various compounds in the oil that are not oil. Some proteins that got in there and whatnot. They start to burn and produce the smoking, which can impart a flavor to your food. So smoking oils are not good for cooking, obviously. The flavor of your food is not great. But to make an oil safe for cooking so it has a high smoke point, it has to go through a refining process that is very laborious and ends up producing a very toxic oil as an end product. So I don't recommend any oils that have been refined, with the possible exception of coconut oil, because since coconut oil is so stable, the refining process is not very involved. To basically, when you refine coconut oil, you remove the coconut flavor from it. So it doesn't taste like coconut oil anymore. It tastes like just tasteless oil. But that one, Spectrum, is a company that makes refined coconut oil that I think is okay. If you want an oil that doesn't have a taste to do some cooking because it's a saturated fat, that might be a good one for you. But any other refined oil, I just don't go there personally. I'm very careful with my oils and fats because they're such a fragile thing, such a fragile nutrient. Let's go to Roman numeral number 8, omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. This is a critical factor to be aware of. Our ancestors consumed an indigenous diet that was abundant in the essential fatty acids, the omega-6 and the omega-3 fatty acids. Remember, the omega-3 fatty acids are the ones that are anti-inflammatory, and the omega-6 fatty acids are the ones that are pro-inflammatory. And you need a balance between the omega-6 and omega-3s so your body has the ability to do both of those processes. So our ancestors, as we've sort of looking at their diet of what they ate, we have discerned that they ate about a 1-to-1 ratio in the omega-6 and the omega-3 fatty acids. Modern humans are consuming anywhere from 20 to 50 to 100 more times omega-6s and omega-3s. Why is this the case? Well, first of all, we're all consuming a lot of vegetable oil. If you go to the grocery store and buy a processed food in a box or a can, read the ingredients, most likely you're going to see vegetable oil. What is vegetable oil? Typically it's safflower or sunflower oil. Occasionally it's canola oil. The safflower and sunflower oil, we're talking like 250, 300 times more omega-6 and omega-3. So all of our processed foods, which most Americans are eating in abundance, has an abundance of omega-6, which by the way is toxic because it's sitting in a package that allows oxygen to get through and turn it into a rancid fat. So not only are our omega-6 consumption dramatically increased and our inflammation in our body dramatically increased as a result of this, but also our poor liver has to deal with the toxicity of these omega-6 fats. Another reason why we have this skewed ratio in the modern world is because we're consuming factory farmed animals for our animal protein. And what are the factory farmed animals fed? They're fed corn, which is a very unhealthy food for animals. Animals don't eat corn. This is not a natural food for animals. Animals eat grass. You know, and grass is very balanced, 1-to-1 ratio in the omega-6 and omega-3. So the cow's flesh and the chicken's flesh and the sheep's flesh becomes very balanced in the omega profile when you eat it, if it's been eating grass. But if it's been eating corn, corn's 34-to-1 in terms of omega-6 versus omega-3. So then the meat becomes very imbalanced, and we eat that, we become very imbalanced. And also just a decreased consumption of omega-3 fats. Why? Because the food industry doesn't like omega-3 fats because they're so easily turned rancid. It's not conducive to profits. So what have they done? They've converted our polyunsaturated fats through hydrogenation to plastic so they can make more money. So we don't have any omega-3 fats in our diet anymore unless you're paying attention. So this is reasons why our ratio is skewed and reasons why it's important to pay attention to this. And just to help you do that, certainly it's important to only consume grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, grass-fed animal protein, wild-caught salmon instead of farmed-raised salmon, because they feed the salmon the wrong food in addition, and the salmon, instead of being rich in omega-3s or rich in omega-6s, exactly the opposite of what they should be. But also it's important to pay attention to the plant-based omega-3, omega-6 as well. If you look at this chart, fat composition of foods, I've listed all these seeds sort of in the order of omega-3 percentage. So you see the last column here is the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. And you'll notice flax and chia seeds, the only seeds in this list that have more omega-3 than omega-6. So flax and chia are a very good thing to have as part of your diet because it gives you a rich amount of these plant-based omega-3s that your body could potentially convert to DHA and EPA and can really help your body. The rest of these seeds, I mean, hemp seeds, pretty good, 3-to-1. Sachi inchi, pretty difficult to find that one. Marlene sells that little packages of sachi inchi seeds. It's South American peanut, is what I call it. Tastes a lot like peanuts. English walnut, 4-to-1, that's pretty good. Macadamia, 4-to-1, that's pretty good. Or 6-to-1, that's pretty good. Canola, 4-to-1 is pretty good, but I don't recommend consumption of canola oil because it's all refined, it's all GMO, almost, and it's all sold in clear containers and therefore rancid by the time you consume it. 3 strikes, canola oil's out, basically. So olives and avocado, not the best ratio, but you notice the percentage of omega-6 and omega-3 in the 2 columns prior to the last one. There's not a lot of omega-6 and omega-3 in avocados and olives. So even though the ratio is not ideal, there's not a lot of that ratio. So you're not going to get really imbalanced by eating a lot of olives and avocado. I don't worry too much about that. But anytime I go like pecans or lower, I'm aware of the fact that I'm consuming a lot of omega-6s, which tend to produce inflammation in the body. Look at peanuts, 5,000 times more omega-6 and omega-3. I mean, you want to get a lot of inflammation going on in your body, peanuts are a great way to do it. Plus peanuts tend to grow mold, as does pistachios, and that mold will also create inflammation in your body. So these are very inflammatory seeds. I'm not saying peanuts are bad, or Brazil nuts, which have a lot of selenium, are bad. I'm not saying almonds are bad. I'm just saying it's good to be aware of the fact that they have a lot of omega-6, so you don't want to over-consume them. And when you do consume a lot of them, you might want to consume some flax oil, or maybe take a few more capsules of your fish oil that day to just balance that out. so that you maintain that healthy amount of omega-3 versus omega-6 in your body. This second column here, coconut oil, palm oil, cacao, that's chocolate. You'll notice that there's hardly any omega-6 and omega-3 in these foods. So you can eat as much of these as you want. You're not going to imbalance your omega-3 and omega-6 ratio. Just an FYI. The very last group down here are basically greens, fruits, grains, and butter, just to give you some idea what's going on with those foods. And there's not a lot of fat in any of these foods except butter. So, eating a lot of strawberries is fruits and vegetables basically are very balanced in their omega-6 and omega-3 ratio, but you don't get much of that balanced ratio. So don't think you're going to correct your almond obsession by eating a bunch of kale. It's not really going to work. Okay, so let's kind of go back to where we were in the discussion here, and the question is, where were we? We're on to cholesterol. Let's talk about cholesterol. And then I'll open it up to questions here. Is there anything that I missed here in this little sheet? Doesn't look like it. Yeah, I did forget to cover. I'll just let you guys read up on this yourself. This little metabolism of essential fatty acids chart. This just shows some of the cofactors that are required to take the omega-3 fats and turn them into EPA and DHA. So you can just kind of be aware of that, lots of B vitamins. I'm not even sure this shows the cofactors. It doesn't. This chart doesn't show the cofactors. But you can see the multiple steps, at least, that are required. Very difficult metabolic pathway to take these plant-based omega-3s and turn them into EPA and DHA. So this is one of the things that, vegans would be wise to pay attention to. For those vegans out there. Okay, so let's talk about cholesterol, and that'll be the last topic here. So what is cholesterol, first of all? It's definitely a lipid. It's a fatty substance that, kind of similar to saturated fat, has a high melting point. It's very sticky as well, like saturated fat. And therefore, it is feared by people with heart issues, because cholesterol, if you've got a lot of it in your blood, can make your blood thick and sticky like saturated fat. The thing about cholesterol is it's sort of the body's repair molecule. It's necessary for all your cellular membranes. Like saturated fat, cholesterol provides rigidity to your cellular membranes. You need cholesterol. Every cell in your body makes cholesterol. Every cell in your body doesn't make something unless it's really important. Cholesterol is really important. It's a critical compound for your health. There are many different things that cholesterol does in your metabolism for you. And it's been vilified. Why? Because scientists have discovered cholesterol in the arterial plaque that's coating people's arteries and causing heart disease. But cholesterol is not the villain in this story. Cholesterol is actually, maybe you want to think of it as a hero that gets caught up in battle, so to speak, and ends up being part of the carnage that's happening in people's arteries. It's almost like this. Here's a good analogy to sort of help you put the whole cholesterol is bad idea in perspective. So you've got a city in America, let's say Chicago. There's a lot of crime happening in Chicago. Every time a crime happens in Chicago, the police show up. So the detectives back trying to figure out what the heck's going on and causing all this crime, they're like, hey, you know what? We've been kind of watching this situation here, and we're noticing that every time a crime shows up, the police, every time a crime happens, the police show up. So you know what? The police must be causing this crime. And therefore, we're going to try to lower the police to the lowest level possible to solve this problem. That's sort of similar to the reasoning that modern medicine has adopted when they look at cholesterol. Because cholesterol is the body's repair molecule. When you've got a lot of damage in your tissues and in your arteries, because you've got free radicals damaging, you've got chemicals in your blood that are damaging the walls of your arteries, your body tries to repair it. Your body creates some cholesterol and sends it in there because to make new cells, your body needs cholesterol. And your body needs a lot of cholesterol. So cholesterol is going in there to try to help, It's just your metabolism is so out of whack in your body that as the cholesterol is going in there to try to help, it basically it's not able to do its job properly because the metabolism is so out of whack, and it ends up getting incorporated into that arterial plaque in a way that contributes to the problem. But the cholesterol is not the cause of the problem. It's only a symptom of the situation. So trying to lower your cholesterol, in my opinion, is the wrong approach. And why does your cholesterol get high? A lot of the reasons, I mean, there's other reasons, but one of the reasons that's primary in our culture is sugar. Because sugar drives up insulin. One of the things insulin tells the body to do is tells the liver to create more cholesterol, and sugar creates tissue damage. Sugar is very sticky. Sugar sticks to protein and fat molecules throughout the body and basically deactivates them and it basically destroys them. And then you get all this tissue damage in the body, and then the body is trying to repair that by sending in cholesterol, so your cholesterol levels go up. So once again, sugar is a big part of the problem, and cholesterol is not the thing to focus on. The thing to focus on is what's causing the problem, which there's many causes of heart disease, but sugar is usually a big contributing factor. And some of the factors are toxicity, exposure, anything that is in your blood that shouldn't be will damage your arteries and lead to more heart disease. So you've got to clean up your diet, clean up your lifestyle, get healthy fats, lower your sugar content. It's a full lifestyle adjustment. And then your body doesn't need so much cholesterol to do repair work and your cholesterol comes down. But focusing on cholesterol by trying to lower it with drugs, in my opinion, unless it's an extreme situation, which you can benefit from those cholesterol-lowering drugs for maybe a short period of time while you go to work on addressing what's really the problem. So it buys you a little bit of time so your blood doesn't get too thick maybe. But the bottom line is cholesterol is not really the issue. And the thing is, you don't even necessarily need to eat cholesterol because your body can potentially produce all the cholesterol it needs without you consuming it. But typically, dietary cholesterol doesn't drive up the levels of cholesterol in your blood. Your body has a feedback mechanism. If you eat more cholesterol, it's going to produce less cholesterol because it doesn't need to produce as much cholesterol. Many people don't have a very functional feedback mechanism, though. So that if you eat cholesterol, your body is not able to reduce its production of cholesterol, and cholesterol will go up. So, sometimes reducing cholesterol is helpful to get the stickiness of the blood reduced. But many times it's not really the issue. So I want to sort of allay your fears about eating cholesterol, about eating things like eggs. You shouldn't worry about the cholesterol in the eggs. You should worry about it if you're sensitive to the eggs. If the eggs are causing a food allergy issue, that's really the issue with eggs. It's not the cholesterol. So talk about some of the important roles that cholesterol does in your body. As I mentioned earlier, cholesterol is used by all the cells in your body to regulate the membrane fluidity. So it's an important part of you not being jello, And so your cells have the appropriate rigidity so that they are able to absorb the nutrition and not things they don't want. Bile salts are made from cholesterol. And bile is vital for the digestion of fats and therefore the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. It's an important precursor molecule for the synthesis of adrenal hormones like cortisol, which helps you deal with stress, and aldosterone, which is important for blood sugar, blood pressure regulation, electrolyte balance, and the sex hormones, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. I said the body can produce all the cholesterol it needs. Many people's metabolism and liver are not in good enough shape to be producing all the enzymes the body needs to make appropriate levels of cholesterol. So this is one of the reasons why somebody does a vegan diet, their sex drive can start to tank. Because of the fact their body's not able to make enough cholesterol, and then they're not able to make enough testosterone or estrogen to basically produce that libido. Something to be aware of if you want to do the vegan thing. So it can benefit us to support the body because cholesterol is such an important molecule to consume some cholesterol. Take the pressure off the body to have to produce so much of it on its own. Important precursor molecule for vitamin D. Vitamin D is just involved in so many different systems in our body. If we don't have enough cholesterol in our body, we can't make vitamin D from the sun, which is a problem. Our immune system's not going to work. we're going to lose muscle tone. We're going to, nervous system's not going to be very functional. It's many problems are caused by low vitamin D. The brain actually has about 25% of your body's cholesterol. Cholesterol is very critical for the health of the nerve cells in your brain. For the nerve cells to transmit their signals appropriately, they need cholesterol, which is part of the myelin sheath that coats your nerve cells. That myelin sheath is not in good health, your nerve cell conduction is not going to be good. If your nerve system's not functioning well, you're not going to be a very happy or healthy camper. So cholesterol is critical for that purpose. Low cholesterol is linked to depression because cholesterol is important for the serotonin receptors in your nervous system to be functional. If you don't have enough cholesterol, your serotonin receptors aren't going to work, which means your serotonin is not going to be able to communicate with the nerve cells very well. Serotonin is a feel-good chemical that helps you have a sense of well-being and calmness, helps you fall asleep at night as it's converted into melatonin. So you want to get depressed, get aggressive, get moody, get violent, get suicidal, and have diminished intelligence, then tank your cholesterol below 150 total cholesterol. That's a great way to do it. You know, so this low cholesterol madness is just that, madness in my mind. Mother's milk is very rich in cholesterol because babies need it for proper nervous system and brain development. Promotes absorption of essential fatty acids. Another thing that promotes absorption of essential fatty acids, by the way, is saturated fat. You can increase your absorption of omega-3s by, like, from the research I've seen, like 200% by adding a little coconut oil when you consume those omega-3s. Coconut oil, because it's a saturated fat, helps you absorb the omega-3s much more effectively, up to twice as much effective absorption of your essential fatty acids when you add a little bit of coconut oil. And also, cholesterol is a very potent antioxidant, so cholesterol actually protects the health of your arteries and prevents heart disease. So I am big on cholesterol is a good thing, and I'm not into this cholesterol is bad. You know, cholesterol happens to show up in the arterial plaque not because it's a bad thing, but because the body's metabolism is so out of whack that something that's sent in there to help gets caught up in the carnage that's happening in the arterial system. One thing to be aware of though, like other fats, cholesterol can be toxic. If you cook a cholesterol-containing food like eggs or any animal protein excessively at really high temperatures, the cholesterol can oxidize. And oxidized cholesterol is a problem because oxidized cholesterol will create free radical damage just like oxidized fats, rancid fats will. And so you definitely do not want to oxidize cholesterol or else it will promote heart disease. But healthy cholesterol consumption, definitely not a problem. And remember, your body should have that feedback mechanism functional. Apparently about 30% of the population from the data that I saw when I was looking at this a while back doesn't have a good feedback mechanism. So if you eat cholesterol, your cholesterol levels are going to go up. But if your feedback mechanism is functional, you should eat cholesterol and it shouldn't affect your total cholesterol in your blood. So I mean, I'm sure Dr. Evan has a lot more to say about that sort of thing than I do. I think that's about all I have to say, in fact. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to field them. So, yeah?
What is too high for temperature to try and eat it?
Good question. I would probably try to keep it below 300 because 300 is that temperature at which the essential fatty acids start to turn into trans fatty acids, and trans fatty acid production really gets going at, like, I think 320, something like that. The temperature's in the notes there. It's 320, 390, something like that. And also the eggs are rich in omega-3s, right? So they're very fragile, and so you want to, I don't recommend scrambled eggs because you're breaking up the eggs and exposing all the omega-3s to oxygen and light and whatnot. Sunny side up is much healthier way to prepare an
So
egg.
if you have numbers on your burner, how do you know?
Great question. I would just cook it as low a temperature as you could and still effectively cook it. So, yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
So if you're putting an egg, poaching an egg is really bad in hot water.
Poaching egg, well, boiling water is 212, right? Here at sea level, so that's not a problem. Yeah, so, yeah. Anybody else?
Well, maybe you could give just an example of, because I'm trying to think this, because I'm not vegan anymore, but I was vegan for a long, long time, you know, and that was supposed to be the healthy way to eat, and I was
Yeah,
vegan because I didn't want to support factory farms and all these kinds of things. Now I'm not vegan anymore, but I'm just like, I don't eat much meat, and like, I was just always taught, like, don't eat butter, don't, I'm like, what?
So,
Like, give me an example of like breakfast, lunch, and a dinner, like that would be healthy, because I'm kind of
What,
like,
for a
I
vegan?
don't know.
For a
No,
vegan?
not for vegan, just like, what do you eat
Well-
for breakfast?
well, first of all, let me just state, I don't have a problem with a vegan diet. I have those tendencies myself, actually. What I do have a problem with is most vegans are very uneducated and very unhealthy because of that. So if you're going to do the vegan thing, you got to be very educated. You got to really learn what the potential problems are in that diet. And I did a talk, I think back in December, that's up on our website on how to be healthy as vegan. So, you know, if you have a tendency to want to eat that way, you might want to watch that talk.
Okay.
There's some things to pay attention to. But in terms of like a healthy breakfast, lunch, and dinner that's not vegan oriented, you know, some eggs with your breakfast is a good way to start the day, because protein, typically your liver's burned through the protein stores it's held during the night when it's been involved in its detoxification work, and it's a little deficient in protein. So you can replenish those protein stores by having some good protein in your breakfast. Eggs are a great protein if you're not sensitive to them. And with that, you can just have some vegetables on the side. You know, maybe steam them. You could do an omelet potentially. So that is a good way to start the day for breakfast. You know, for lunch, I like to think of my plates as like 25% of protein. I'm talking area of the plate. So it could be fish, could be some grass-fed beef, you know, could be some free-range chicken, and then 50% of the plate, vegetables. Talking non-starchy vegetables, things like zucchini, peppers, tomatoes, carrots, onions, kale, spinach. These are non-starchy vegetables which have no blood sugar effect, which are rich in all the phytonutrients and minerals and vitamins. So 50% of your plate's like that. Another 25% of your plate can be a starch, thing like quinoa or sweet potatoes. And I like to have fat with my starches, because starches have a tendency to have a little bit of a blood sugar spike. And I like to keep my blood sugar stable, so if I add a little bit of fat to those starches, that prevents the blood sugar, them from causing any blood sugar issues. So, you know, that's kind of how I like to think of it. My starches are never the main meal. I never make a bowl of quinoa unless I'm exercising like crazy and make that like the main part of my meal, because it's like all carbs, right? So I want to have some fat with my starches. I want to keep it to a small portion of my plate, and then I want 25% of my plate protein and 50% of my plate non-starchy veggies, and that's my breakfast, or my lunch and dinner follow that paradigm. You know, 25%, 25%, 50%. And there's lots of different variations in that paradigm that you can do. So, yeah.
I have another question.
Yeah.
I think I might be one of those people with the cholesterol problem. So I'm just, and I guess it's a doctor question, but I just had my cholesterol done at the clinic over here, and I got all these red like numbers that I was showing you. But like I'm confused because I was, you know, I thought I ate so well for so long and all that kind of stuff. But because she was gonna, you know, nicotinic acid, and I'm like, I don't know what that is. And, you know, does that mean that I'm one of those people that can't, like, that shouldn't eat cholesterol still? So, that's why I'm a little bit confused about that.
No.
Yeah. Well,
You want to take it?
go for it.
It's definitely more complicated than just cholesterol. The inflammatory markers on that test are very important. We're very excited about that test because it gives us a lot of really good information. There's also some genetic cholesterol markers that indicate increased risk for heart attack, heart disease. So that's some of the other things we're looking at in there. And there's some cholesterol markers that, like the small dense ones, will actually poke holes in your arteries and cause more inflammation. So, but a lot of that has to do with diet. And if you're, like Doug's saying, you know, if you're eating good diet, if your liver is healthy, and it can exchange the good and not so good cholesterols with the arteries, and you've got an anti-inflammatory diet, you know, you can heal a lot of that stuff. There's some things you can't, like some of the genetic markers, like lipoprotein A and some of that stuff. But overall, you can definitely improve things, and I would strongly recommend eating a diet that is high in fats and protein, kind of like what Doug's talking about. You don't have to shy away from cholesterol.
Yeah, shy away from sugar. Sugar is the bane of modern humans, basically.
Let's say you're gonna cook some meat in the oven, and you don't want it to stick, but you don't want it to taste like coconut.
Probably refined coconut oil is what I would use,
Okay.
or butter.
Okay.
You know, or palm oil. Palm oil is a fabulous oil. Nobody uses it, but I love it because it's red. Number one, it's rich in carotenoids, which your body can convert to vitamin A. It's solid at room temperature because it's mostly saturated fat. It's the most vitamin E rich oil on the planet, which is really great for heart health. You can get it at the co-op. So it's another oil that's good for cooking at high temperatures like that because it's mostly saturated fat.
The butter does burn and smoke, you know?
Yeah, so that's where the refined coconut oil probably would be your best bet because it's not going to have that smoking phenomenon that the butter will.
So you shouldn't, like, even like if you're sauteing chicken or something, you shouldn't really use olive oil for that necessarily.
You know, it's not ideal. I mean, it's not going to kill you, but it's not ideal. So, you know, I don't really see a big deal if, you know, on occasion you do some very quick, mild, light sauteing of your food with olive oil. But because it's a monounsaturated fat, it will definitely degrade a lot more than the saturated fat. So it's just not ideal. But yeah, don't worry excessively about doing that on occasion. It's not going to kill you. And if that's the worst thing you're doing in your diet, you're doing great. So, yeah.
Are supplements a good way to make up for some of your deficiencies in your diet? Like, let's just say like fish oils. I don't know, can you get omega?
Yeah, definitely. You can definitely, you know, you consume a lot of fish oil or algae oil to get the DHA and EPA, and you can even purchase flax oil capsules and get just straight flax oil and put it on your food. So yeah, you can supplement with these omega-3s if you're not really eating a lot of fish. If you're freaked out about the whole Fukushima thing, you don't want to eat fish, you know, then you know you might. Well, you be careful with your fish oil too. The fish oil is purified, right? So all those potentially radioactive particles and heavy metals are purified out of there.
So what was the ratio you're supposed to go for the omega-6s versus omega-3s?
1 to 1.
1 to 1 is
Yep.
ideal.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely do not start counting your omega-3s and trying to figure out how many omega-6s, how many 3s you're eating in your diet. That's just, yeah, don't go there. Don't do that to yourself. Just be aware of it. Be aware of the general trend of your diet, and if it's clear that you're eating more omega-6s and 3s, you might want to take some corrective measures, which means add more omega-6s and maybe reduce some of the, add more omega-3s and reduce some of the omega-6s. So.
And we do have testing available to see what your ratio is and whether or not you need more 3s.
Great point. Yeah, I just had that test done myself. I mean, it really takes a red blood cell and measures the omega-6 content and the omega-3 content. So you can literally see what the ratio is in your tissue and whether you're balanced like you should be or out of balance. So the test is called NutriVal. It's a great test. Yeah.
What happens to the fats in, say, sunflower seeds when you sprout them?
Good question. Well, when you sprout any seed, the fats in the seed are part of what fuels the sprouting process. Because a green growing herb or a sunflower sprout, there's not a lot of fat in there. So where did all the fat in the sunflower seed go? Well, that was the energy source that fueled the sprouting process. Just like fat can be a fabulous energy source for our body, which is long burning and very no glycemic issues with it. Fat is a wonderful source of energy for sprouting, for the sprouting seeds as well. That's the fat in the seed is actually the stored energy that is there to fuel that sprouting process until the sprout is able to root into the soil and start getting energy from there. So the fat is, fats
The
are,
sunflower seeds seem to have a lot of fat. If you look up the nutritional
Totally.
stuff, they have a lot of fat in
Yeah.
them. But if you're sprouting them and putting them on some salad, then
yeah, so if you got a tail and your sunflower sprouts like this, and they're not turning green yet, there's still a fair amount of fat in those sunflower
in
seeds.
sunflower seeds.
But if you're growing them into a green sprout, then in harvesting those green sprouts, there's hardly any fat in there.
Okay.
So, but sprouting process, if you sprout your sunflower seeds with a little tail like that, there's still a fair amount of fat in there, and a lot of that fat is already digested for you.
Oh,
Because so you eat a handful of sunflower seeds that haven't been soaked or sprouted, pay attention to how that feels in your stomach. Eat a handful of sunflower seeds that have been sprouted with a tail like that, pay attention to how that feels in your, it's a totally different experience. So if one digests like a piece of fruit very quickly and easily, the other one digests, a lot more work for your body. So.
You're saying, I'm confused here, probably because I don't have enough cholesterol in my brain, and too much toxins. But,
Oh my God, I'm giving you too much information.
along with the saturated fats, the body uses cholesterol to regulate all membrane fluidity. So I'm not sure if you want it, because then we have saturated fats constitute at least 2% of fluid. We wanted to have some necessary stiffness. So are we going for the stiffness or the fluidity?
We're going for both. We need both. We need saturated fat, we need monounsaturated fat, we need polyunsaturated fat, we need all types of fat in your cellular membranes in the right balance to get the right amount of fluidity and or stiffness to basically allow nutrients to be able to be brought into the cell appropriately and toxins to be released appropriately. If your cellular membrane is either too rigid or too fluid, there's going to be problems. So there has to be a balance between those two things. And so I would say probably most Americans have cellular membranes that are probably too rigid and not enough fluidity. And they need to eat more essential fatty acids, polyunsaturated fats to solve that problem. But it'd be interesting to actually get everyone in a NutriVal test to actually see what the situation is, because many people are eating so many vegetable oils in their diet that they might have too much fluidity as a result of that. But then too much sugar, which contributes to stiffness because the body turns it into saturated fat. So it's, you got to figure out where you are in there by getting a NutriVal test done is the bottom line.
And if you're one of those people that, for years was told you should, do this low-fat kind of diet thing, I mean, does your gallbladder kind of recover from that eventually when you start doing fats, or is it all from years of abuse?
Definitely can recover. You want to support it with beets. Beets are rich in betaine, which the body turns into choline. Choline is one of the main constituents of bile, helps thin the bile fluid to basically start to break up some of those gallstones and help to break up some of that sluggish bile fluid that may be stuck in the gallbladder. So beets are phenomenal food for gallbladder health, as is lecithin, which doesn't have the betaine, it has the choline already made for you. So lecithin and beets are really a great way to support your gallbladder coming back into a state of health if you've been experimenting with a low-fat diet for a long period of time. So, yeah.
what if you don't have gallbladder?
If you don't have a gallbladder, then you got to take bile salts with every meal for the rest of your life. Basically, or you don't digest your fats well, which means you don't absorb your fat-soluble vitamins effectively, which means you start to get all of the problems that show up when you're deficient in fat-soluble vitamins. So, yeah, so I would, we celebrate bile salt supplement right in here. I would just come here and get the Allergy Research Group bile salts, take one capsule right at the beginning of every meal, and just keep doing that. So that's a way to sort of support your body because it's no longer secreting bile into the food properly. So, yeah, you're welcome.
You're going to take the gallbladder out for
Yeah,
years.
yeah, totally. Well, if you don't think it does much, then it's not a problem to take it out, so.
Yeah.
But yeah. You can work around that. Just take your bile salts and you should be all right. So, you're welcome. Thanks for coming, folks.